I just want to say good afternoon. I'm Carla Hayden with the Library of Congress, and thank you for joining us today in welcoming our three very special guests. As we know, national libraries and archives play a vital role in a democracy in every country. And we have an important duty, I believe, in collecting, preserving, and most importantly, sharing our national treasures and collection items with the public we serve. And so today, I know you are joining me in looking forward to hearing and learning from our colleagues at three national libraries and archives. And a point of personal privilege, I'm very proud to say that you can see that all of these leaders are women. Oh, look, she's like, because librarianship is one of the so-called feminized professions, and sometimes the leadership doesn't always reflect it. So we're very pleased, in fact, that at the Library of Congress and at the National Archives are both led by women at this time. So we're really pleased that this sisterhood is spreading and that. And we also have the National Archivist of New Zealand and the Archivist of Australia. Could you all please stand? So please join me in welcoming Leslie Weir, Librarian and Archivist of Canada. You may clap. Mary Louise Ayres, Director General of the National Library of Australia. And Rachel Eason, National Librarian of New Zealand. It's wonderful to have all of you here today. And just to let you all know, you all have been visiting the last 2 days with staff and things, and there was a comment made just a few minutes ago that one of you thought, wow, I've come a long way, and I'm spending a lot of time away from home, and I'm wondering, was it worth it? Okay, was it worth it?
Yes.
Tell us what you've...
Well, it was. I think, am I on? Yes, I'm on. Yes, and we've spent a week actually in Ottawa first. So for those of us coming from Australia and New Zealand, we're away from our offices for more than 2 weeks. We've travelled, 27 hours or so to be here. And you do wonder, is it worth it? Because you're trading off quite a lot. We've had such wonderful conversations across our institutions. And really, I think it's been equally as valuable for across the library and archives spaces. And our 2 days here have been wonderful. So I'm sure you would want to also say thank you so much to those who've given us all of their time, their expertise, and for understanding our business.
Well, now, I want to make sure that today's audience really understands your business and your respective institutions and your roles. Could you just elaborate on what are your jurisdictions and how
All right.
it works?
Well, I'll jump in. So, as was mentioned, I'm the Librarian and Archivist of Canada, which means I'm both the National Archivist and the National Librarian. And at Libraries and Archives Canada, we are responsible for preserving the documentary heritage of the past, the present, and the future. And probably more importantly, the enduring knowledge, making the enduring knowledge accessible to all to ensure the cultural, social, and economic advancement of Canada in a free and democratic society. As well, we are the continuing memory of the federal government of Canada. So an interesting combination.
And perhaps I can jump in now. Te Puna Mātauranga o Aotearoa is the National Library of New Zealand. Mātauranga is the Māori for knowledge, and Puna is the spring. So the National Library is the wellspring of knowledge. We take that really seriously, and I'm really proud that in our Act we actually are called Te Puna Mātauranga o Aotearoa. So we are the keepers of documentary heritage in New Zealand. We also have a role to connect our communities to our collections, and we have a role to support the library community. In our legislation, it is called to supplement and further the work of the sector, and we interpret that quite broadly. Another thing that I think is a little bit unique about what we do is that we also have a literacy and learning division, and we directly support schools with a large lending collection to support the curriculum and provide specialist advice to school librarians. So that's us. Kia ora.
And the National Library of Australia, we're a federation in Australia, we're a bit like you. So it's important to know that each of the states and territories in Australia also has a strong library that deals with their local communities, and that we work in that federal sense. We're certainly the largest library in Australia with, I think, the richest and the deepest collection. Like others though, our job really is to develop that collection, to connect with communities, and like New Zealand, our Act of Parliament also charges us with collaborating with others in matters of library science, and we have interpreted that to an extent that we run the national infrastructure that every Australian library uses for their daily work, so that's as big a part of our role as our collecting and connecting work is.
And that infrastructure that you...
Yes, so we've been running the Australian National Bibliographic Database since 1981, so we're talking decades here. And then when the digital world started to arrive, we really didn't do anything alone then. We always were looking at a national level. And I guess where we are now is many of you will have heard about our National Discovery Service, Trove, which is a collaboration across more than 900 partners. And we also have a national e-deposit service, so a single national service and collection meeting the legal deposit requirements of the Commonwealth and each of the state and territories, all of whom have different legislation. So it's really that metadata and digital collections infrastructure we're running on behalf of the nation.
And your connections with your governments.
Yes.
What are your direct connections?
Well, connection with our government, we're independent, so we're what's called a Commonwealth corporate entity. We're governed by a board. That board is appointed by our Governor-General, but really at the pleasure of the Minister. But it does mean that we are not directly beholden to our minister. In fact, our minister is not the one who signs off on our corporate plan or our annual report, so there's a bit of arm's length there. We have close relationships with the Parliamentary Library from whom we grew, and I think we're highly respected by Australian government because we reach people in every electorate across Australia.
That's on.
So we are part of a broader government department, the Department of Internal Affairs, and I have explained to some of the colleagues that we've met with during our travels that that is also the department that is responsible for issuing passports. So that's kind of interesting. It's good from a cybersecurity perspective, not quite so helpful when you're bringing in electronic material for legal deposit. So I report to a chief executive who reports to the minister, but we have a bit of distance as well.
Well, we do talk about passports to reading, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
That's very true.
Sorry, couldn't resist.
Yes, so at Libraries and Archives Canada, I report to Parliament through the Minister of Heritage, and so we're part of a portfolio that includes things like CBC Radio-Canada, our national museums, our national gallery, but also the group responsible for telecommunications, the group that funds films, the National Film Board, the Official Languages of Canada, and a number of other areas of responsibility. So I do not have a board the way my colleague institutions do, so I like to say that nobody's the boss of me.
Wow. Sounds Interesting. So you have all of these things, and I know you got a chance to look at the library's new treasures gallery, and we're just wondering, we have to ask, what are some of the unique treasures and things that you have in your
We all
collection?
said this is like having to choose one of your children. I'm a former head of manuscripts at the National Library, so this is very hard. But for this audience, I wanted to highlight the papers of Edward Koiki Mabo. The papers of Eddie Mabo and the Endeavour Journal of James Cook were Australia's first inscription in the Memory of the World Register. Eddie Mabo was a man from the Torres Strait who was absolutely certain that if he took his case through the Australian legal system to assert that he did actually own his land, that the legal system would support him. For those who don't know our history, we have no treaties still. Australia was assumed to be terra nullius, an empty land, and therefore our First Nations peoples had no formal ownership of their land until Eddie Mabo said enough and took his case all the way to the High Court, and the decision in 1992 has changed our country. Sadly, Uncle Eddie died 6 weeks before that judgment was brought down, but I think he knew that it was going to happen. So for me, that kind of a collection that recognises that terrible doctrine of terra nullius and the courage of one man and his belief that the contemporary legal system would support him, I would say that is... I talked to my granddaughter about it recently. I sat her down in front of a display and said why this mattered. And I thought it was a very important moment for a 6-year-old that she'll probably remember. So that's what came to mind for me.
It's powerful.
So we've recently acquired the diary and a number of letters, or the journal and a number of letters of someone called John Norton. So John Norton was born in the late 1700s in England, and his father had been brought over from the United States. He was a First Nations person who was taken to the UK as a child and grew up. Then he married a Scotswoman and had a son named John Norton. So they both had the same names. And then John Norton joined the military, the British military, and was deployed to Canada. And this was in the early 1800s. And so we've recently acquired a journal that covers his life from 1805 to 1806, when he had been adopted by Joseph Brant, who was a chief in the Six Nations, and he ended up becoming the head of diplomacy for the Six Nations, and he actually ended up bringing those nations in on the side of the British in the War of 1812.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
So we do feel that this is one of the seminal documents around the future founding of the country of Canada, and we're quite thrilled to have those materials. Interesting point, when he was in London, he met a lot of people, and he wrote pages about the British politician who brought in the law outlawing slavery. And he was in conversation with him back in 1805, 1806. So the diary is very rich, not just with things that relate to his nations, but in fact to what was happening in society at the time.
Real time.
I'm going to choose something a little bit different, well, actually two things. One of the things we have that is unique is we have the largest corpus of digitised Te Reo Māori material. So we're going right back to letters that were written in the 1800s and books that were published in Te Reo Māori. But the other unique thing I think that we have is a collection of oral histories called the Political Diaries. And that's 40 years worth of interviews with the leaders of our political parties and our Governor-General. So they were interviewed weekly during their time in office, and that just finished last year. A lot of those interviews are not accessible yet. As you can imagine, there's probably some very interesting things in there. But it includes things like weekly interviews with our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, during the COVID pandemic, around the decisions she was having to make with very little information. And the first lot of those interviews has just become available. A previous Prime Minister, David Lange, sadly passed away quite young, so his interviews have just become available. But we think that contemporaneous interviewing of political leaders is quite an extraordinary collection, and I can't wait for more of it to be available.
No comment. But we all have a similar mission of engaging with the general public. And we talked a little bit about that before, especially about engaging with youth. So could you just share why it's valuable to your institutions and your missions? And are you connecting in any unique ways or special ways?
Shall I just start this time? One of the things that we have on display is Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi that was signed between Māori and the Crown in 1840. It's not a National Library collection item. It belongs to my colleague, the Chief Archivist, Anahira, so it's a public record, but it's on display in the National Library. It was a pragmatic decision because of where it was displayed and the fact that we're open longer hours. But we do have a program to bring school children to come and visit those documents and have an experience and understand the significance of the treaty. So that's one of the things that I think we're doing very intentionally, is to bring kids in, help them understand that significance, have an experience and connect to those documents.
About children.
So maybe I'll jump in to say, at Libraries and Archives Canada, we have traditionally engaged more with what I would call expert to expert. So our librarians and archivists work very closely with academics, with historians, with federal government researchers, with researchers from First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation, genealogists, not a lot of youth. And I was telling Dr. Hayden earlier today that when I announced, as I came into Libraries and Archives Canada, that we were going to start engaging a lot more with youth, they said, "Oh, graduate students?" And I said, "No." So I would say right now we are transforming our services in preparation for 2026, when we are going to be moving our public services out of our iconic building at 395 Wellington, just down the street from Parliament and next door to the Supreme Court. And we're moving into a building with the Ottawa Public Library. And this building is working with the Ottawa Public Library, with Libraries and Archives Canada, and in fact, our third partner is the Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nation, because we are building it on their traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory. And so they have worked with us to design the building, to design the services, to design the programming. We're going to have trilingual signage in Anishinaabe-Moan, French, and English. And we are very, very excited that it will bring in a volume and a much wider demographic than normally would see themselves engaging with us. We have a very iconic building that is perhaps fear-invoking for your average person. So we're very, very excited to look at anticipating 1.5 million people coming through this new building when it opens in 2026, and having a total revamp in our programming and our engagement with educators and with children and their families to make for a very different service offering.
Wow.
I'll take a different tack. I remind my staff all the time that 98% of Australians live more than 3 hours drive from the National Library of Australia. We have a small population across a really big continent. So for us, it is digital, digital, digital. Our building is important to us, but I think of it as like an inside-out TARDIS. It's bigger on the outside than on the inside. And, you know, it's really what has led us, you know, of course we have our own National Library website and catalogue, but it is what has led us over the years to invest so heavily in Trove, which is not just ours, it belongs to a large number of libraries. Because it reaches so many people. And just to give you an indication of that, there's about 25 million people in Australia. Trove reaches at least 13 million unique users every year. Do the math. That is, at least half of Australians are being touched by what we are offering from the National Library every year. I think that's pretty impressive.
Very.
Even more impressive, we know that some of our underserved communities, especially First Nations Australians, use that service more heavily than their population percentage would indicate. So they're all signs of success for us. So I guess in terms of that balance of audience, we know that about 30% of our audience remains that academic and scholarly audience, but 70% is not. So I think what our digital services have done is to enable every Australian to become an historian, an explorer, a discoverer, a writer, that it's not the province of the few, it's available to the many.
Rachel, are you going to share
I talked
that
about
sign?
people coming, yeah.
There was a sign that...
Oh, yes. I talked about, we had a parliamentary protest to do with COVID, and the National Library is very close to Parliament. And after the protest had dissipated, actually was forcibly removed, there was graffiti on the sign outside the National Library, and our sign says the National Library of New Zealand. It had been changed to say a library for some New Zealanders. And so we really sort of took that to heart to be a challenge to us to say, how do we actually make sure that we are for all New Zealanders? Like Murray Louise, we do a lot digitally, and we also, through our literacy and learning division, engage and develop resources online. But it's an ongoing challenge.
And that's what leads us into thinking about strategic planning. The Library of Congress just completed a strategic plan last year. So we're real interested in what were some of the issues that you've been working on. Your collections, the balance with physical and digital, the outreach, but not leaving behind the scholars and the researchers. If you could just talk about some of those issues.
Well, maybe I'll jump in first to say in 2022, we completed a vision to take us forward to 2030. Before that, we had always had a 3-year plan, and we found that it was like a never-ending exercise. So we wanted to do something that was at a high level, and the key focus is putting people first. So that's putting our readers first, putting our visitors first, putting members of our staff first, focusing on the people and how our services and our collections can serve people. Many of you will know that in Canada we've been through a lot of introspection about our treatment of First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation. We went through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so we are also really focusing on reconciliation. And for us, we think that access helps create understanding. And we don't talk about the history of Canada anymore. We talk about the histories of Canada, because everyone has a different experience and every community has a different perception of what they've lived. And so we have a real focus on trying to ensure that we represent the stories of all of the voices of the peoples that are in Canada, and that in fact we are making an effort, especially with those that have been marginalized or perhaps even erased from our history. And we have many examples. We can talk about that during the reception later, maybe one-on-one. But this is a big area of focus. So as we look at transforming our services and being sure that we're engaging, I will say, like the others, what we do in our service transformation that will take place in our new building is going to inspire what we do with our virtual access, because we do have many more people access us virtually than we have join with us physically. And I just want to mention that the name of our new building has been gifted to us by the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and it's called Adisoke, which means the telling of stories. And this is so relevant for a public library, it's so relevant for a national library and a national archive, but it's so relevant for the oral histories of the host nation that we're going to be joining. So this is what's inspiring the work that we're doing on our collections development, on our engagement, on our service development, and on what our future is going to look like.
We are required by law, as are all Australian government agencies, to produce a 4-year corporate plan focusing on a year, so we have to do that. And our 5 pillars in our corporate plan are First Nations, collect, connect, collaborate and capability. We are working on a longer term plan. I think we'll finish it this year, and at the moment we think we might frame it around collect, engage and enable. The enable part is really important to us. I guess in terms of some key issues, it's about better serving underserved communities across the full range of our work. So we are intentionally focusing on developing richer collections around First Nations Australia and also our very rich multicultural community, which I think we've ignored. So that's with some very targeted projects. We focused on Chinese Australians, Fijian Australians. We're working on the Indian diaspora now across the kind of collect, engage, enable sphere. So I think for us it's still just the role that we have in terms of leadership in the Australian library community is still incredibly important. And that's not just about infrastructure. Other libraries look to us for what we are doing in these spaces. So we have to be really mindful that if we focus more on these areas, other libraries will be, I think, empowered and enabled to do so.
We also have a strategy to 2030, 3 broad themes: knowledge, taonga and reading. So knowledge is about removing barriers to accessing knowledge. Taonga is about caring for our collections and connecting them to communities. And reading is about a nation of readers, really highlighting how important the role of literacy is and what we can do to inspire, particularly reading for enjoyment, because we know that that is linked with really good life outcomes, regardless of socioeconomic background. But we also have a shared program with National Archives, because we're going to literally be joined together. There is a new archival building being built, and it's going to be linked to the National Library building. So we're working together on a shared vision there, which is Mana Taonga, Mana Tangata Manaki, which is about connecting people, collections and caring for all of those and bringing them together. So definitely aligns with our organisational goals.
Do you see, you mentioned the role modeling or connection with the public libraries and feeling a responsibility with that. What about information literacy and battling misinformation? Do you see a role in that?
Yes, and I'm not sure about my colleagues, but it's something that has been undercooked in our work, I think. And of course, the moment we find ourselves in now, with such a proliferation of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, um, hostile actors trying to influence how people think. We are certainly investing more, shifting, I guess, from information literacy to media literacy, and focusing on lifelong learning in that space. We don't do that alone. We haven't mentioned that Rachel and I, our libraries are both members of National and State Libraries Australasia, so our libraries work together. We have a shared office, we have a strategic plan, we focus on what we can do better together than alone, and information and media literacy will be a focus across that organisation and therefore through our libraries as well.
That's quite a bit. Is Canada doing?
Yeah, and we certainly have focus and have had, I'd say, for more than 10 years on mis and disinformation. Before that, maybe we focused a bit on critical thinking, which really is similar. Do your research, make sure you're using, valid sites, get a range of opinion. So we definitely work collaboratively with libraries and archives, as well as galleries and museums across Canada, looking at how we can collaborate to try to amplify the message of the importance of questioning everything you see and looking for a diversity of opinion and learning about what might be trusted sites, although that's dangerous territory depending on your perception.
And I think because of scale, because we're a small country, we're able to work a bit more directly. We work with our Ministry of Education and are helping them to develop some programs to be able to be delivered through schools. The Ministry has done quite a lot of engagement with countries, particularly looking to Finland, who've had quite a well-developed program largely because of their proximity to Russia. So we understand they've been developing their programs for around 20 years. So we're looking at introducing, with the Ministry of Education, introducing something into New Zealand schools.
Well, that then leads us into AI. You knew it was coming. Right? What?
You did. Look, it's been a big topic of our discussions over the last 2 weeks, and I think what we've realised is that our institutions are all at very similar points. We've all done quite a few experiments. Our countries have all quite recently kind of developed, implemented, mandated good frameworks around AI and ethics and safety, which even a year ago weren't there. I think we've also been through last year, it's that typical thing with a new technology, wow, look at this, what this can do. Then into this slough of despond, oh my goodness, it's going to ruin the world, and now we're coming back up. I know that my library will be publishing our AI strategy. I was just reading a version last night, it's very good, before the end of the year. And one of the things we have been talking about is where are we going to put our investment? There's things we don't have to think about because the tools that we buy from others to do our work will do it. For my library, it is definitely about thinking about the collections that we hold have been invested in over generations by Australian taxpayers. They've been developed and stewarded by generations of professional library folk, and it's about wringing every last bit of value out of those collections that we possibly can, particularly out of our digital collections. But a big issue for all of us, I think, is particularly making sure that when we're implementing AI, that there are very real risks and dangers in relation to our First Nations peoples, because they are not part of those big training sets. So quite a lot of caution, and I think we'll be we've got some small things in production now, we have had for a while, but I think that probably 2025 will be the year that we at the National Library put our foot down and put more into production.
So we too are working on a position paper that we will be releasing, and we've agreed to share drafts amongst our institutions. We also discussed yesterday setting up contacts across our 4 countries to be able to link people to have discussions about where we are with AI. We did a symposium last week with our honored guests from Australia and New Zealand, which was looking at the future of archives and libraries and looking at how technology and AI may kind of de-shelve our future. And there were 2 really interesting concepts that came up there. One, Dr. Mike Ridley was putting forward the concept of that libraries really should be talking about explainable artificial intelligence. So, you know, right now the experts like to say, well, you don't need to know what the algorithm is. You don't need to understand about, the inherent bias that's in there. You don't need to know what data it's been, scraping and analyzing. Well, actually, yes, we do. And the other point that was made by Avery Schwartz was, where's your line? Where's your line as an individual, and where's your line as an institution? And depending on the various factors that come into AI, your line may vary in terms of the possible impact on your organization. At Libraries and Archives Canada, one of the things that follows up on what Marie-Louise was saying, we're definitely worried about the implications and impact for First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation. We're also worried because the corpus of data in English is so much larger than all the other languages, and because we are an officially bilingual country, English-French, there is a great deal of concern amongst the Francophonie internationally that this will be another mechanism that could further marginalize, for instance, the language of French, because the corpus in French is so much smaller, but also generally French institutions were later to digitize or to go to born digital. And so there's actually an international collaboration looking, and French is an example, because I think you could use that with Spanish and with many other languages that have important influences in our countries. So we're very interested in looking at how national libraries can ensure that safety and security while ensuring that AI is used in an ethical way, while also enabling better access and access to more collections, but access that's nuanced. We were discussing the fact with materials that come from our Indigenous people, there may be protocols about who should access what kind of information. And there may be challenges around how much copyrighted information may have been used to train our AI models. So there's a lot of complexity to what we're looking at, but we think working in collaboration can really help us understand our environment and make the most in an ethical way of the AI tools that are evolving.
And absolutely, collaboration is at the heart of where we're heading. Like the other institutions, we've done some pilots, and those pilots have shown absolutely that we have to be particularly careful around the use of AI in our Indigenous communities. But the next investment kind of focus for us is that we've been part of a large project to digitise all of our at-risk audiovisual material, so all the magnetic media. And this has been a collaboration between our National Film Archive, Archives New Zealand and the National Library. So we've digitised nearly 500,000 items. And so the use of AI is going to be in helping us describe that material. And that's where our digitised corpus of Te Reo Māori language is going to be able to help us, but we know that we need to do it carefully. We need to do it in consultation with our community, but we think that there's some absolute opportunity there, and we're quite excited about it. It's not going to happen overnight, but we think it's a really good project to be embarking on.
Rachel, I was just thinking about the not happening overnight. I have let colleagues know that I've been in the business for 30 years, and right from the beginning of my career, I worked with manuscripts, and I knew that one day there should be some way to turn that handwriting into something you could search. And in the last 12 months, we have actually implemented handwritten text recognition across our digital corpus.
Nice.
And I'm not ready to retire yet, but I said I wasn't going to retire until it was done.
Now, part of this collaboration and sharing and getting into AI, all of it, with the IT, the British Library, and the lessons learned that they shared and we all are learning from, can you, and to the extent you can discuss, what measures you might be taking or thinking about with that as we get into this digital world?
At the National Library of Australia, our first cyber security policy was back in 2013. So we'd kind of gotten onto this quite early and had built, I think, a reasonable level of defence. But just about 3 or 4 years ago, we did invest in having external expertise coming in and looking at how hardened our systems were. And we were able to persuade our government to give us some short-term funding to uplift our capability, which we did. And we're in the process now. That short-term funding allowed us to hire extremely skilled and extremely expensive consultants and contractors to work with us, and we're now normalising it. But what that meant was that I would say that prior to the British Library attack, we were better prepared, had better monitoring, and were better able to recover. But we have focused even more since the attack. And I think one of the things I'd say about our British Library colleagues, their communication with the public from the beginning was exemplary. And the way that they have been willing to share with the world and
Yes.
with us what did they learn, both publicly and through those institution-to-institution conversations, I think that they've had a terrible experience, and all of us have been able to learn so much. Other institutions might not have shared so much,
Right.
and they did, so I applaud them for that.
I think we all feel that way.
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, because we're part of the department that issues passports, we have pretty good cyber security. However, what we have seen is where we have had a couple of probes, people testing our systems, and our colleagues in the broader department, rather than kind of hardening that and deflecting, they've actually asked us to keep that going so they can learn from what those attacks are, what that poking is. Makes me very nervous, but they assure me that, this is all part of their security testing and that we're doing a good thing by letting them do that. But I do ask for constant reassurance that that's okay. I think actually the British Library attack, what that has done is just heightened that awareness of the risk, and I think it's made it, I think we've got better understanding from our broader department and our authorising environment and our funding that we need to make sure that we keep our systems up to date. So in some ways, the terrible thing that's happened to the British Library has, as Marie-Louise said, been of benefit to other institutions. So, and I do echo the sentiments about being grateful for what they've shared with us and with the sector.
I will say as well, it's really important to also know, since we are also a national archive, and I think it's true at Library of Congress, you also don't want your past altered so that people think that there was a different past than there was. So we work in great collaboration across the federal government of Canada. We have a cybersecurity agency that is supporting institutions to ensure that they have best practice. But we have also in our digital asset management system where we ingest our digital-born materials built in checks and balances so that we can tell if anything has been altered. And we, I can say, do have redundancy in our backups, but our ultimate backup is OTO tapes locked in a vault because there's no cyber attack that can get to those. So sometimes the traditional may be the best for your last line of defense, but you may not want to have to rely on that.
And sharing that the British Library did and the way we appreciate it and what national libraries can learn from each other. How do you see us all working together? Because we're going to be part of this quad. Someone has said, what is the quad? So I want you to explain that too. But how do you all see us all working together?
I was just going to step in and pick up and connecting the two things, Carla, because look, I'm the chair of the Conference of Directors of National Libraries, and we're having a one-day conference in a few weeks' time, and we're focusing on leading through a cybersecurity disaster. You know, and my instruction to our speakers, no technical stuff. I want to know what happened. It's about what it requires, what a disaster of that magnitude requires of us as leaders. What do we need to think about? What structures do we need to have in place? While the techie guys are sorting all of that out, there's a whole lot of other stuff that happens in the leadership arena. So I think across the National Libraries, we've certainly, and the quads here, we've been talking about specific things that our teams can work on together. But I think a meta theme is actually what is required of us as leaders of institutions at this particular time with these particular opportunities and challenges. And I think that we can get a lot from sharing that. And while we can't travel oceans all the time, I tell you it really helps. It really helps to be in a room with people, to gain trust and to think, you know, if we have a cybersecurity disaster, I've now got extra friends that I could ring up and sob down the phone to.
Well, and I think we've also discovered in almost every area we've discussed over the last 2 days here and last week in Ottawa in Canada is that we share so much of interest. Questions around metadata, around subject headings, around respectful terminology, around engaging with Indigenous people, around dealing with artificial intelligence, around looking at what happens in terms of cybersecurity. And I think we realize that we share a lot. We are each in different places. Some of our institutions are leaders globally in certain aspects. Others are leaders in complementary aspects. And so it creates an incredible opportunity for us to engage members in our institutions to be able to experience in a certain way what's happening in other organizations and bring some of that best practice home or some of the lessons learned where you don't want to go. So I think what we've been doing is relationship building because we do have so many areas of common interest that we could work together on to create a really great future for each of our institutions.
Absolutely. I think the value of kanohi te kanohi, face-to-face, can't be underestimated. I've found the connection over the last couple of weeks both reassuring and inspiring. Reassuring from the perspective that, as Leslie said, institutions are at different levels, and so, you know, I think as a small country, we often feel like, oh, you know, perhaps we're not doing as well as we should be. But it's reassuring to know that in some areas we're actually doing quite well and inspiring, because then when we hear about things that are happening, like the shared public library, National Library and Archives building, the work that your teams are doing, engaging with communities. We loved hearing about the new space that is going to be built for children and engaging children. You know, that's just absolutely inspiring. So I'm going to go back with so many ideas, but also knowing that we're doing the best that we can in the context that we're in at the moment. But I think there's a lot more that we can keep engaging on and working towards and sharing with each other. And libraries are all about sharing.
They are. And I'm just thinking about two things that we've, you know, sometimes it's little things, and I think we've been really inspired to change just two important pieces of terminology. We were inspired by visiting the National Gallery and Museum in Canada, where instead of describing an artist or a creator as unknown, especially in relation to First Nations, it now is once known, and we just thought, wow, we're all going to change that. And the other is, perhaps this is because we're all women, we're not happy at talking about repatriating collections to First Nations communities. So I think we've kind of reuniting. So you know, sometimes words really matter, and I know they're the two words that I'm going to take back to my organisation: once known and reuniting.
Reuniting. There's a little bit here, I think. So just before, I know we have time for some question and answer, and we have a mic here. Where do you see your libraries in the next 5 or 10 years or so? What do you?
So maybe I'll jump in and say, read Vision 2030. It's on our website.
Okay.
You can reach out, happy to answer any questions, but I just can't resist. Some of you may be aware that I'm the president-elect of the International Federation of Library Associations. And so, yeah, whoop.
Yay.
So I will be becoming president in August of 2025. So it seems like the longest rest rehearsal ever.
Amplified.
But what I wanted to say is that IFLA is coming out with its strategy through 2029 imminently, and they are also doing a brand new from scratch global trends report. And I think that will create very interesting debates across the library community globally and in different regions. So I would just like to encourage you all to follow that, and you know, then we can look at having some follow-up virtual conversations and discussions. But I think that will help each of us look at the context within our own country and the role of our own institution, but then look at how we connect globally.
I think when I look at where I see the library in the next 5 to 10 years, it's probably, I'm oversimplifying, but we're going to collect less and we're going to engage with communities more. We're really looking at a kind of a post-custodial model, moving beyond that. Let us as the national institution look after everything for you, and then you might be able to have a look at it if you fill in all the right forms and come and see us. So we're really about helping communities keep things themselves, be able to tell their own stories, but do that with the support and the help. It's not about us shifting all of the cost and all of the responsibility. It's about doing it together. And so that's the kind of shift that we're looking for.
And I might take a different tack and say that, although of course in 5 and 10 years I hope that our library will be more valuable to more people, more useful to more people, but I just think I have no fears about the future of our library, and that's because of the quality of the young people that are coming through our ranks. You know, just a few years ago, people were wringing their hands thinking, what is going to happen when this generation retires? And now I'm that generation. And I look at the passion, the ability to work more creatively, more fluidly, and I think better with communities that I see in our younger staff and those across the cultural institution profession. and I have no fears about the future. When you're in a role like this, you're very aware that you are just a steward for a few years.
That's right.
There's been many before you, there'll be many after you, and it's just your job to steer the ship, hold the treasure. I have no fears about the next 5 to 10 years, but I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
That's a good way to put it, that you're helping the ship continue, not to sink it, keep it on the thing so that it can continue on. And you're right about being encouraged. I'm looking out, I see a lot of people who I work with, and it makes such a difference to see a caterer or this one or that one, and like, good, we're getting tired. So you're right, the future is bright. It is bright. So we have a mic, and if there are any questions or comments, it's a great time. There's one right there.
Thank you all for the time and trouble to be here. I'm Jeremy Johannesson, Executive Director with the Chief Officers of State Library Agency, so I wrangle the state librarians here in the U.S. We've seen an absolute explosion in book challenges here in the United States. And I see that as indicative of the intentional politicization of our libraries. And I'd love to hear you comment on the parallels in your own nations and your outlook for the coming years.
Yeah, maybe I'll start because we're pretty close neighbors, can I say. What we're seeing actually is that we get echoes that come north from the United States.
We're sorry.
Yeah. And it's interesting because originally they were targeting large urban areas, and they've given up on that because the public libraries are very strong, they have huge support, they have influence with politicians, and they seem to be able to keep some of these things at bay. So they changed their tactic, and they're going for rural, remote areas where the libraries are far smaller, and it seems to be easier to build a certain momentum. I will say that for Libraries and Archives Canada, we're completely working with all of the different libraries across the country and other organizations, because we are supporters of freedom of expression. And in fact, the Canadian Urban Library Council and Libraries and Archives Canada joined together with our book and periodical publishers to take over hosting Freedom to Read Week. And we are very proud of the Toronto Public Library that has a site where they make banned books available nationally. And we work as a very collaborative group to try to ensure that, in fact, books are available, challenges are being countered, and that we want to, especially with LGBTQ two-spirited people, as you know, I think in Canada, we were fairly early adopters of equity of treatment, early adopters of marriage for within that community. It's been shown that while we have a small faction that might like to take us back to a ideal past that they seem to believe in, that in fact the population will not allow that to happen. But we are very concerned when we have something like one of our famous authors that was banned in a number of states in the United States because her last name was gay.
Oh, Roxanne.
So
Roxanne.
critical thinking, misinformation and disinformation, I think, links through to this question. And certainly we're very aware of the treatment of some of the library staff and some of the people trying to ensure that their library patrons can access collections that reflect their patrons and their patrons' needs and interests. And we're keen, once again, to work in a way that we can to try to support that freedom of expression globally.
It's interesting, about 3 or 4 years ago, I told my board that this infection would come to our borders and they didn't believe me. And it landed in Australia, probably 12, 18 months ago. But it is nothing like at the scale here. I think there's a number of reasons for that. The first is that I think Australians are fairly kind of tolerant, pragmatic folk. We're also very secular. We're really not religious people. So the secularisation of our kind of state is fairly firm. But there are also structural issues. Most of our public libraries are funded through their state libraries, and they have funding agreements that set out certain things. And right at this moment, certainly where those agreements are not strong enough to deal with this kind of issue, they're being fixed right now. And I suppose we also have almost like a national standard. We have a national classifications board, so states don't have their own boards like this. So that board decides what kind of content is just illegal, and the bar is very high. What should be available only to people over 18? Again, that bar is pretty high. So that is kind of the standard that is being written into these agreements. So it's not up to an individual community or public library to decide what is okay and what isn't, because the funding agreements basically say if it meets these criteria from the classifications board, then your library should have it. But we too have been very shocked about the treatment of people just going about their work as public librarians, and certainly the Australian library community mobilised really, really fast on this. I don't believe that there is really minuscule political support for this kind of activity in Australia. I think the other thing I'd want to say though, and I have said this publicly and to groups of librarians, that because at the moment the particular challenges are mostly around LGBTQI plus material, in some ways it might be a little bit easier for our profession to stand up for that freedom. And basically people should be as free to read material in our collections that asserts that the earth is flat, or that the world was created in so many days. So, we have to make sure that we are upholding our values in terms of freedom to read for everything, not just perhaps in areas where it might be a little easier for our profession to kind of feel righteous. That's harder, I think.
I think, like our colleagues in Australia, we could see what was happening and what might be coming. And so we worked very closely with our Library Association to develop a toolkit to help particularly the smaller public libraries have policies in place and work with their councils to make sure that they were prepared. And because we have the Literacy and Learning Division that works with schools and school libraries, we were able to do the same there. So we haven't seen a lot in New Zealand. We've seen a little bit, but the libraries have felt reasonably well prepared. And like Marie-Louise, there hasn't been, to date, I will say, but to date there hasn't been a lot of political support for that challenge, for those sort of challenges. So hopefully we're reasonably well prepared, but I think it will come inevitably.
Yeah, so if I could just add, I think we may be modeled more similarly on the United States in that our public libraries are funded generally municipally or by their county. And libraries are seen, each province and territory, have their sometimes financial support, sometimes recommended policy supports, but really each library has to work within its political context, so it doesn't get funding from a state or provincial library. It generally gets it from the municipality. So if you have a municipality where the politicians are very sensitized perhaps by an external force, the libraries then need to sometimes they can be proactive and anticipate, and sometimes they're caught being on the defense, which can be challenging, especially when, for instance, images or materials are taken out of context and sent bombarding all of the, the counselors or the politicians.
There is time for one more question before I ask you to get back to explaining the quad. But one more question or comment.
Don't be shy.
Well, you'll get a chance to mingle in a minute. So, the quad.
Okay, well, the quad. It's funny, this word kind of came up, didn't it? Where, and, sometimes ideas get a life of their own. And we started to talk about, our 4 countries getting together and what we could do together. And because we were talking a lot about the British Library, and we know that Rolly is about to visit you.
He's going to come.
Of course, Britain is also a member of the Five Eyes, which has made us think that maybe it won't be the quad, maybe it needs to be the quin. But I think we really saw, well, for a start, we signed an agreement, 17 copies thereof.
Bilingual French-English.
Now, signing an agreement is one thing, but I think over the last 2 weeks it's become much clearer to us that you don't want to say we're going to work together on 10 initiatives, but I think there are 3 or 4 areas where we think we can get real gains from having regular meetings across our 4 institutions, or possibly a 5th, and in terms of peer review and possibly doing some things that are a little bit more together. So all of us have MOUs with lots of other national libraries that don't actually do anything. I don't think that's going to happen with this one.
Well, and I think the magic of this is 4 countries with the National Library equivalents and the National Archives. So we will be heading off to NARA tomorrow, and so they are part of this quad. And I think that really creates an incredible opportunity around all of our published heritage, around all of our archival materials and all of our special collections and all of the services and events around that. And I don't know, this may be a first in history.
It is.
I think it is.
And in D.C., they call them a gang of 6 or 8 or something. So we're the quad. All right, we're going to do it. Great. Well, thank you all. And I know some of you probably said, what's that mysterious note that she got earlier? The dark writing, and it seems so urgent. It's to invite everyone to see the special display from Library Collections and Services Group, led by Robin Dale and her group. So thank you, Robin. Can we give you your group a hand? Thank you. It's set up, not strategically, but in our gift shop. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you. And thank you all.